Greetings, gamers, and welcome to the 70th live stream. 70th. Yes, 70th live stream from the Misfit Gamer Studios. I'm your host, Vortex, and this is D&D Discussions. On today's episode, it is just going to be me. I don't have Kage here in the studio with me, but on today's episode, we are going to be talking about gaming etiquette. This is actually a topic we've kind of loosely discussed this before. We've discussed many things about, how to, as DMs, how to deal with players, how to be more approachable, how to be more accessible to a lot of different styles of players. And we've also discussed, the approach that we think players can take to become better players, to deal with difficult DMs, how to, better themselves, and how to improve gaming experiences and gaming campaigns and, gaming parties. But today, excuse me, on today's episode, it's going to be a little bit different because I had a question on one of my gaming streams, I think it was yesterday. One of the newest followers, I don't know if he's going to be able to show up, but I think it was the Freeman, came in and had some interesting questions, things that I wasn't able to answer right on the spot, either off the top of my head, and I just really wasn't in the D&D mode. So I wanted to put that off to the side, and then when I did get some information on it, felt like a good topic. It's not really something I think I would have normally covered in this particular way. I don't know how relatively, I don't want to say, new. I don't know how long these have been used. I haven't been exposed to these, so I've read up and kind of just want to go over some things that I found regarding, gaming etiquette, gaming safety, and just kind of some of the culture that has grown around that, because I do find that it's interesting, and I do find it fascinating to see what has grown in that culture, because for me, the way that I've always looked at, D&D, I have played with randoms. I have played in public settings and played just, out and about on the internet. So I've had that experience, but it's not my traditional experience. It's not what I'm typically used to. And so it's not something that I've been overly exposed to over the years. So when I typically talk about gaming etiquette, and when we've discussed it on stream here, a lot of the times what we're discussing is from the viewpoint of people who are gaming either with friends or are gaming with a relatively inviting group, I should say, right? Typically what we discuss is how to handle, maybe difficult players that aren't bad players. They're not making anyone feel uncomfortable, but they may be rowdy, or they may have a particular play style that doesn't quite fit in with everybody. But we've very rarely discussed the darker side of the experiences people have had. And I think for the most part, it's because we try to be lively here, and it's not really the topics that we would normally run into, because it's not really the preferred experiences that we would like to dwell upon, but they are out there, right? Those type of experiences do exist, and thus the community has, of course, as the community does, created, various ways to basically make their safety nets, make boundaries, and make ways for people to explore Dungeons and Dragons and explore getting out there and gaming with new groups. And I found it quite fascinating what I found, because these again aren't really things that I have myself run into. They're not really topics that I have had to utilize personally, but I think that in particular, it's just due to my approach with D&D. Who I approach and who I game with. I don't really typically just game with completely random people anymore, unless it's online. But I've had some unique experiences, I should say. But I don't know if I've had the type of experiences that would have warranted the need for what we're going to be discussing today, the type of etiquette boundaries. So it's going to be interesting, because I am kind of exploring this as a topic that's new to me, but as well as I want to give commentary on it, from someone who has, over a decade of experience and I really want to kind of piece this together of, where it came from, how useful it is. Because, so far from what I've read, I like all of it. I think it's absolutely fantastic that these are out there. I do think that as I read it, I found that this is a lot more from not necessarily an online community a viewpoint, but definitely I don't want to say stranger, but more of what I call like public gaming. In the sense that not necessarily you're in public gaming, but public gaming as in it's not you and your friends group at home. It is either somewhere you go, like a game shop or a card shop, or online where you go and meet with people that you don't necessarily know, but that you game with, right? So I call that public gaming because you're gaming with other people of the public. And like I said, I've done it a couple times. Not really my preferred method, just because of scheduling and conflicts and chaos, and typically it's very difficult to find a gaming style that I like. So that's part of the reason why I became a DM. But that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, because they asked me a couple questions I couldn't answer, and I wanted to kind of just build a topic out of it, and it was really fun to research this. And let's see, the original question was, what do I think of safety tools like X-Card or lines and veils? And that was something that was really interesting because I wasn't sure how to answer that. Those were not terms that I was immediately familiar with. Like I said, I had to go and research a lot of that over the last couple hours, last day and a half. So in that vein of researching just those, I don't want to just talk about that, but I do want to go over this topic of gaming etiquette a little bit more than we have before. Because like I said, Kage and I have discussed aspects of being a DM and aspects of being a player that we feel are conducive to better, more positive gaming experiences. But when I read through, what these are here for, it does make me realize that we kind of glossed over, or at least took a lot of assumptions when we had those discussions. And so I want to kind of reevaluate and go over my viewpoints of gaming etiquette from this point of view, from the point of view of public gaming, from the point of view of finding people, players, and DMs that may or may not have social boundaries. So I broke this stream into two sections because I felt like if I was just going to focus on the question at hand from the new follower, it wasn't going to amount to a lot. But I also wanted to discuss more about general gaming etiquette as well, because like I said, we've covered it, but we've kind of glossed over a lot of things. So I think what we're going to start is I'm going to start kind of with my general concept of gaming etiquette, and then we will circle back towards the end and discuss more specifically the question at hand with the safety nets that are involved, because a lot of the things I want to talk about in terms of gaming etiquette, because that's just a whole concept outside of just, not being a weirdo. I want to kind of cover a few of the core points that I really feel are important for both players and DMs. And then I want to use that because that'll be like my foundation for what I normally look at it from. And then I want to come in after the fact and use this new perspective to kind of fill in any gaps from that. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing today. Hopefully it'll be enjoyable for y'all. Hopefully you guys are having a good week, or at least had a good week. Happy Friday. It has been kind of weird recently for me. I took some time off work, and it's been kind of nice to get some recouping done. Did some work around the house. It's been very relaxing and cathartic, even though it's been busy. And I've been traveling all day, getting tools and supplies and stuff, and actually did a whole bunch of work. But it's good, and I needed the time off. So, hopefully you guys are all having as good of a day as I am. Today was very nice for me, and I hope that you guys have a good weekend coming up. But without further ado, I think we shall get into our topic. So I wanted to start with kind of some core concepts of generalized etiquette. And we'll start with DM etiquette, because I think that's obviously where a lot of the discussions that we have all kind of orient around for me and Kage, because that's what we do now. We do mostly DMing. So when it comes to DM etiquette, what are we talking about? There's a lot of different ways to be a DM. We've discussed that on this stream a lot. And we've discussed different approaches, ways to go about incorporating different additions, different abilities, how to work with players in different ways, how to be creative in different ways. But when it comes to etiquette, these are more of the foundational pillars that you want in order to create a, I don't want to say successful gaming career, but to be successful long term. You know, we've talked about the ways to improve here and there, or ways in which you can just take on new aspects of being a DM. But I think these are a little bit more revolved around the core pillars and things that are going to be noticed and tracked by players. And I think we've talked about a lot of these, but I don't think we've ever really narrowed them down into a succinct list like this. So that's kind of what I want to do, is take everything that we've discussed so far and add a few things, and then really just make out a list of what are some of those core aspects that DM should have. So we have talked about this first one a lot, so I wanted to start with this one because we talk about this all the time. And that is the core foundation, the core pillar of consistency, right? This is consistency in so many different things. It's being consistent across your player groups in terms of the way that you narrate, from gaming session to gaming session, from campaign to campaign. You don't have to be good at narration, but being consistent, I think, is more important. Yes, being good, being able to articulate, being able to do voices, all of those things are fantastic. Being able to be a good storyteller and craft a story and use the right words to paint the right picture, all of these things are great. But if in one gaming session, I'm getting a very, Vincent van Gogh type of setting, and I'm getting that visualization, and 2 sessions later I'm suddenly getting Picasso, it's going to be very disorienting. It's going to be hard to keep up with a DM who's going to change up how their narration and how their plot points and how their campaigns are going to run, right? So consistency in gameplay, consistency in the rules that you set, right? So having, we've talked about this before, not allowing a player to do something that they've seen an NPC do, or vice versa, having a player not be able to do something and then an NPC do it later. Those are slight inconsistencies that players will notice. Inconsistencies in how spells work, in how you make certain rulings. We've talked mostly in the past about how to just make sure you document or have a way to make sure that rules that you have made continue on in the future. Because again, if you set a expectation, you want to follow that. But consistency also consists of fairness across your rulings, across your players and your campaign sessions, right? If you're not consistently treating all of the players and all of the characters with the same level of detail, with the same level of attention, that's going to be something that people notice, right? So consistency really is a good one of the first good foundational pillars, because it really just means that once you've found out how you want to be a DM, lock in on that. Lock in on being that type of DM and work with it and keep trying to become better at it. But you want to make sure that, if you're going to be running a certain type of campaign, or if you're going to be running a certain edition, or if you're going to be, changing rules a certain way, you want to make sure that those rules apply throughout, and make sure that people can rely on that. So we've talked about that one, I think, to death previously. Consistency, we will always talk about. Being consistent as a DM is not only good for gameplay, but it is good for players because they feel that they can now understand the game and they have a much better understanding of how to prepare moving forward. With the campaign and with your setting, or at least your gaming style, depending on how you set up all of your campaigns. And then pillar number 2. Pillar number 2 is basically allowing, you can call this a different couple of things, but basically like respecting player agency. Respecting player agency. And this one is really just, we've talked about this one a lot, giving player agency, how to allow for more creativity from the player, how to allow the player to kind of feel like they're in control while also making sure that you understand what you have to do as a DM to push the story along. And this really just comes down to how to balance player autonomy and the narration, pushing the plot forward. And Kage and I have used several examples of this in the past, but really this pillar comes down to understanding that as a DM, yes, this is your game, but you're also a player, but you're also just a player, right? Like that's that balance that I think we discuss a lot for DMs, is making sure that you understand, yes, you're running the game. Yes, you're in control of it. Yes, you may have written the story. This may be your world. But when it comes to the actual gaming session, you are but a player amongst players. They are as responsible for pushing the plot along, pushing the game along, and adding to that story. And ignoring that, not allowing that player agency to really change how things are outside of the choose A or B, and then I don't care anything else that you do, without really allowing them to have those things adapted to the story, you're going to make that disconnect. So, and it's not really encouraging player agency, because when you basically tell them, I'm going to give you an A or B choice, and anything additional outside of A or B, I don't care what else you say, all I'm waiting for is you to say A or B, it's going to basically not give them that encouragement to be more creative and to try unique solutions if they know that all you're waiting for is one or the other with no other additional options. So by simply, limiting what they can do, or at least limiting the actual effect that happens, you are limiting the autonomy, because you're removing their ability to actually have make a difference with their creativity. And even though the narration is important and you have to make sure that that narration does follow through in some capacity, as a DM, we need to be flexible. We need to understand that, yes, it is our job to make sure that they stay on track, but the story isn't, pre-written. The story is a guideline, and we need to be able to move and flex and work with the players and allow that player agency to shift the path of the story, as long as it's still moving in the right direction. So that is pillar number 2, respecting the player agency, not getting in the way of it, making sure that their autonomy versus the narration is well in balance, and making sure that you can push the story along with allowing them to kind of, shift and meander. Pillar number 3. I think this one's actually a fantastic one. It's deserves to be way at the top here. This actually should have been probably number 2. I'm not doing these in any particular hierarchy, but now I'm realizing that this one probably should have been right up there with consistency. And this is communication, right? Communication is, again, we talk about this one quite a bit, but we haven't really talked about it in the sense of creating a welcoming, opening, inviting environment. We've talked about communication in terms of setting expectations, and that's always good. But being able to have that communication to set, rules, set schedules, making sure that people understand the importance of adhering to those. And rules can be anything from, house rules like, hey, don't eat at the gaming table, or, don't take too long on your turn. If you're in combat, make sure you understand, where, what all the enemies are. Don't have sidebars or something until you get distracted, and then when it becomes your turn, you're taking too long, right? These are things that, we've run into, and these can be rules that you set. This is this open communication. If you are a DM who knows that you have triggers, know that you have things that set you off, or know that you have pet peeves that you just don't want to have, it isn't a bad thing to say, hey, I'm not okay with this. I'm not okay with you bringing food to the game table. I'm okay with you eating while we game. Just don't have it at the table, right? Step away while it's not your turn. These are boundaries that I think sometimes get overlooked, because we try to be very inviting. We try to be so open to having anybody be able to join us. And we want to have people join. We want to have people have fun, and we don't want to hold them back. But at the same time, that's a lot of the time at our sacrifice. And I mean, players and DMs do this, right? Sometimes a player will come to the table and maybe they have a problem with someone doing a certain thing or a way that just gets handled at the table, but you don't want to speak up because you don't want to rock the boat. But open communication doesn't have to be rocking the boat. It can just be about making sure and ensuring that everybody, that's the same, I just said the same thing twice, but basically ensuring that everybody is comfortable, everyone is accepting and open to the game, right? If someone has a problem with you having a problem, then that's going to be a dysfunctional gaming group. I will tell you that right now. If if someone has an actual issue with how something's being handled, how something's being said, or how something is just, done while the gaming group, again, like let's say someone always brings chips and it's loud, it's annoying, and whatnot. If that person brings it up that it's a problem, if someone's mad about that, it's like, you're going to be a dysfunctional gaming group. It shouldn't be a problem to say, hey, that's really distracting. Again, it all depends on the approach, right? You can't just be like, hey, you need to, shut the fuck up and stop eating chips. But that's where the communication opens up, right? Either going to your DM or going to that player or just bringing it up, however you feel is the best way to approach it. But getting that open communication to start happening, I think a lot of people overlook that. And I've seen that in a lot of like the horror stories you see people posting online. I feel outside of the ones that are more targeted, that are more about, people coming after, or the DMs, being specifically against or for someone really specific, a lot of the horror stories I found seem to arise from people knowing they have pet peeves and issues, but ignoring them until they become a problem, and not trying to victim blame here. I don't want to make that misconstrued that I'm saying that, it's their fault for not speaking up. But when you look at the situations and how they escalate, it seems like a lot of the times, had something been brought up early, it may have been able to be solved relatively easier, or hopefully relatively sooner. So again, not a victim blame, but there are times where I wonder, would better communication have been able to resolve that? Or at least, would sooner open communication have at least revealed that this was going to be a problem and you could have gotten out before it happened? Not everything's sunshine and roses. Not everything's going to be solved just because you say something, but at least it could have opened up that can of worms much earlier before something had become a problem. So communication, making sure that everybody understands what those expectations are, both on the rules, the gameplay, telling someone what edition you play in. I mean, that is one of those things that I have a very, very specific aspect. When anyone finds out that I do D&D, that I'm a DM, anybody asks me about it, and I talk about it. I just say, I do the stream. I DM. I have a couple games that I run, and if they ever show interest in wanting to game with me, the first thing I always end up doing is I'm like, okay, well, first off, you have to understand gaming with me isn't normal. Whatever you think of it, it's probably not the same. And I don't do the normal edition. I do second. I have I have aspects of others, but I primarily do second in my settings. So if you're expecting 5th edition, or if you're expecting Baldur's Gate, or whatever it is that they're expecting, I usually say it right out the gate. I try to have that open communication of, my game is going to be much different. Gaming with me is going to just feel different. It's going to evolve differently. But I try to do that partly as a warning, but also because I feel I don't want people to be misled. I don't want people to get all set up and then start gaming with me and not, and basically just be either disappointed or realize that they're not getting what the expectation was. So I'm always about this. I really feel that this is much more of an understated pillar for success for DMs, is communication between you and your players. I mean, players also need to be more, communication and, more open to communication, but players are less likely to do it. It's really on the DM to, when you're bringing those players in at those session zeros, or when you're, introducing yourself to those players, really getting that communication started one-on-one will help get that communication opened up when the team is all together. And actually, I think yeah, pretty much starts with the DM opening up that line of communication on an individual level. So hopefully the entire party will be a lot more open to communication as the game goes on. And again, setting those boundaries as a DM and even asking about their boundaries, seeing, again, between the rules, the gameplay, all of that. Everything can be summed up at that session 0 or at those introductions, and kind of start that process of making sure that it's okay to ask questions. Ask them, do you have any questions of me? Ask the player a lot of questions. Let them know that it's not just a, hey, show up with your character sheet and just wait for your turn, right? Because I've been in those gaming sessions where the DMs are so of, I expect you to just know everything. I'm only here to tell a story. And again, if you guys have watched my streams before, you know how I feel about that. I am not that type of DM. I don't actually believe in that type of DM. I mean, unless you're a gaming group who's gamed forever and you all have your roles and that's what you guys do, that's fine. But for me, I believe that the DM, it's much more of not necessarily our job, but it's much more of the expectation that we are going to have the knowledge, and it's going to be on us to make sure that the players are caught up. And having the expectations that the players should know as much as you to be as prepared without question, and kind of just like expecting them to just have everything. It's like, it may seem efficient, but it really doesn't make cohesive stories, and it doesn't make cohesive gaming groups in my experience, because everybody is coming in with their own personal expectations. And even if everybody is playing the same edition and has the same rule sets and has the same idea of what's going on, there really hasn't been any cohesion. There hasn't been any bringing together of those ideas and of those mindsets. And if the DM is really not open to that, the players have no real incentive to do that as well. So again, being open at the start is really a good idea. This is part of the reason, I think I've mentioned this before, of why I have, for new players who want to join High Point, this is why I have what I call the scenario, the pre-game thing that I run that everybody through, that doesn't require a player sheet, doesn't require a character. You don't actually do anything. This is long before you ever actually start gaming with me. But when anyone basically shows interest or tells me that they want to game with me, what I end up doing is sitting them down, kind of giving them the spiel about, I game 2nd edition. It's a little bit different. And one of the things that I do is, in order to give them kind of, especially for people who've never played D&D, I do this, but anybody who I feel like hasn't played a version of D&D based on their description that is similar to mine, I like doing this a lot more for those than just the average player, because it's really interesting to see how they tackle something new. I've done this for players who are very similar, and they just kind of either walk through it or they have a lot of fun with it. But brand new players is really fun for me, because I get to introduce them to all of the mechanics without having to worry about all the paperwork and everything. It's all done via dialogue. It's a thought puzzle that doesn't require, any rolls or anything, because part of the description of what I tell them is, everyone understands the dice rolls. Like, D&D has a couple aspects, right? There's dice rolls, there's the combat, there's the role play, and like diplomacy, right? Like actual talking with characters, role playing characters, fighting, and then dice rolls. And then there's thought puzzles. There's the riddles, the thought puzzles, the things you actually have to think through in order to accomplish whatever it is, right? Basically some 5 things that you can do. Or that I describe how D&D is. So with the scenario, what I do is I basically tell people, it's look, you know how to roll a dice, and you get the concept. You want to roll high, you have a number you want to hit, or you want to roll low, right? There's only so many ways that you roll a dice and you hope that the number's correct. So let's not bother practicing that. And character sheets, that's basically just a bunch of numbers, and that's things that you can figure out later. So let's not worry about that. Really, let me show you, now that you understand, what that's going to be. Combat's easy, right? Again, it's dice rolling. So then I basically introduce them to the scenario, which is, let's look at all the other things, the dialogue, the role play, the thought puzzle, and I run them through the scenario, which allows them to interact with my world, see how I am as a DM, see what they do, see how I react, the type of descriptions I give. And I feel like it's really fun because it gives them an insight into, it gives them an expectation. It gives them an insight into how my world works, because instead of walking in and thinking, okay, so you're just going to give us a spiel, then we're going to go into combat, and then we're going to dice roll. This scenario really allows them to see that it is a tactile world. Everything that they do reacts to them and gives them a sense of curiosity about what else they can go do now. And it's really fun because I think that that's part of my open communication of not just letting them know I do a different edition and I play things differently, but having that little like pre-run scenario allows them to kind of formulate in their head like, okay, so this isn't just a I have an axe and I have one attack, I can just do that. It in my opinion, it helps prime my players to understand that what you say and what you do matters. If you tell me that you're, if you go in for a basic attack and D&D just says you swing and if you hit, you get damage, that's great. But for me, if you're saying that you're like swinging at their feet and you hit, I don't see why I wouldn't go for a dex check to make sure that they don't fall. Like, it doesn't have to be a special feature that you can do that. It's more about understanding how combat works. And that's what I like to do in terms of like my communication is I try to push that open thinking right from the beginning. So yeah, that was a long-winded explanation, and it probably didn't need that, but it was kind of fun to talk about. But that was the third pillar for the DMs, which is communication. Next pillar, kind of already talked about this one, but it's being welcoming. Basically, this one's pretty easy. It's being open and inviting, right? It's not being a gatekeeper. It's not being a micromanager. It's not being a creep. That could be, whatever you think of when you hear that term. But being welcoming, open, and inviting, being a DM that people want to game with, that is willing to answer questions, or at least about, their setting, and is willing to learn their players, I think are all qualities of a welcoming DM. Not necessarily you have to have every single quality, but these are a combination of qualities that I feel make really good DMs, because again, players are not as assured. It is the expectation that the DMs have the rules and the setting well understood. And so players want to do a lot of things, but not a lot of players can do a lot of things. As in, players may be able to do things, but they can't. A lot of the times DMs won't just allow players to say, I do this and it accomplishes, right? It's more of a, I want to be able to accomplish this, so here's what my intention is going to do, here's my attempt, and then they have to wait to see if the DM allows it, if they have a role for it, things of that sort. So being a welcoming DM is, allowing that creativity, allowing people to try new things, not being rude, not being insulting. I think we all know what being welcoming and open is, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of DMs out there that I've run into who, again, are a little bit hot-headed. They are a little bit egotistical. They can be arrogant. They can be belittling and condescending if, you're not at a level that they respect, or, a base level of respect. So I would say that those, if you run into those, I think if we've all had one of those, then you kind of understand the difference between a welcoming DM and a not welcoming DM. But that's why it is one of the pillars. That was pillar number 4. Pillar number 5. This is being an encouraging DM. And what I mean by that is a good DM will encourage roleplay and creativity. And we kind of talked about this in communication. So I probably long-winded added this one, so I won't stress it too much, because we did kind of cover that in the communication. But being encouraging in terms of getting your players to roleplay, to participate, to be part of the party, part of the team, and being creative, right? Again, not every DM wants super creative players because they're not super creative themselves, which is fine. Everybody needs to find that, that equilibrium so the party can, flow together. But you still want to be encouraging to get the player to that level. If a player is too boisterous about their role play, maybe you want to encourage them to bring it back. And if you have a player who shows up but never talks, maybe you want to encourage them, ask them more questions, see if they can get more input out of them, right? And maybe that's also, again, part of the communication. Maybe that's a side conversation to see if they're only there to just kind of listen and not participate. Maybe they are that kind of player who's just not going to be there, right? So encouraging doesn't necessarily mean being pushy. It just means finding a way to get that player involved to the best of your ability and to the best of their capacity, while not making them feel uncomfortable. Next pillar, number 6, this one's a good pillar too, flexibility. Now, for the most part, this is like flexibility in schedule, because we all know how, we all know the meme of the sad DM who never has players show up. But flexibility, I think, also comes down to, it kind of ties into the player agency conversation we had earlier, because it comes down to being flexible in the narration as well as player choices. And mostly what I mean by that is being flexible when the story is taking maybe a slight turn off of what you expected or what you had planned to narrate, and it's due to maybe player actions, or it's just due to the outcome of a situation. And there are some DMs, Kage and I have talked about this a lot, or at least we've mentioned quite a bit about railroady DMs who were like, no, you're going to go down this street, or you're going to go talk to this person regardless of what the players are trying to do. And that, I think, a lot of the times is frustrating. I think most players just put up with it just because it's still the game and they're still going with it. But it is very frustrating. And those are the times when being flexible and allowing the players to push the boundaries of that linear portion of the plot, I think is just a good aspect for any DM. And being flexible in the player choices, right? This is being flexible in that case is similar to if you accept the rule of cool once in a while, where they may pull something off because they got a really good roll, and maybe they'll pull something off that they weren't supposed to, right? And it's just good for the narration. That's being flexible. Or being flexible because they're trying to use something in a way that they shouldn't be able to, but they're being creative about it, so you let it go to reward them instead of giving them an inspiration point. Or, they have a really good monologue while they're talking to an NPC, so you let them get away with something, right? Being flexible and if you had like an NPC that you knew for a fact wasn't going to give them information, but let's say the player themselves stands up, gives you a beautiful monologue and just like knocks it out of the park. Maybe you don't even have them roll for charisma. Maybe you're like, you know what? He wasn't supposed to give you this information. Like I had it written here. He was never going to give it to you. He's going to give it to you, right? Like you don't have to be game breaking about it, but being able to have those moments will really make you shine with your players, and I think will really make you stand out, and it really makes for a better experience for a lot of the players. Next pillar we have is challenge. I don't know how I want to say this one. Balancing the challenge of the game versus the fun of the game. And I know that Kage and I have discussed this one so many different times. We have several videos, or at least live streams right now. We have several VODs of this type of question or this type of discussion. And what it really comes down to is knowing how to make sure that the players are always feeling like they're working for something. Doesn't necessarily have to mean that everything is hard. That doesn't mean that every battle has to be near death. But they do have to be faced with things that will make it challenging, but you also want to make those challenges worth succeeding, right? You don't want to have a challenge, you don't want to have 5 battles back to back where every battle they're walking away with 1 hit point and they're basically all just sitting there like, and then they're not happy about it, right? If they're just sitting there like, wow, we almost died. Okay, that was like the 3rd time we almost died. If they're not having fun with it, throwing more difficult challenges doesn't seem to be it, right? But if you gave them a challenge that is that was allowing them to work towards something, right? Maybe they were almost going to catch the BBEG, and yes, he got away, but make sure that him getting away feels right instead of him just being like, well, I don't want you to catch me, so you're not going to. But making sure that for them, you want them to walk away in that situation. You would want them to walk away with that, we were that close, instead of the, Yep, he got away. Of course he did. You know what I mean? Like that's that balancing the challenge versus the fun. You want to make those lost moments feel worthy. You want to make those lost moments feel as if we almost had it, but you also want to make the wins feel like wins. You know, you don't want to just make them feel like, well, yeah, we're level 10 now, so obvious that we would have finally caught this guy. You don't want to make it feel scripted. You want you that, and that's really I think the big difference between a good challenge versus fun is to make it fun, you don't want to make it feel scripted, but to make it challenging, you don't necessarily have to make it hard. and that's not really easy. That again, like I said, we've had so many different episodes and so many different conversations about how to do that, because that is not something that you can just sum up how to do, or really you just can't sum that up in a paragraph or in a small discussion. That's why it's its own pillar of balancing that challenge and fun, because it encompasses so much, and there's so many different ways and challenges that you're going to face as a DM to do that. But I think the key things to walk away from, are just, again, difficult doesn't necessarily mean challenging, and wins don't necessarily mean fun. It has to not feel scripted. If it's not scripted, both a win and a failure can feel amazing if it doesn't feel scripted. Next pillar, we are down to the last two pillars for DMs. So the next pillar is table dynamics. Now, this is a very, very strong pillar. Even though it's towards the end, this one should have been probably closer to the top. Now, table dynamics is basically, from the DM point of view, is how do you manage table dynamics? And this is both how you manage table dynamics in-game and out of game. In-game being how you monitor players' turns, how often that they get the spotlight, how much they get to talk, how they interact with each other, how the characters work together as a party. If there's strife, do they just go overboard with the strife and make the party not cohesive, or do they role play it in a fun and engaging way where everyone's having fun with it, to where you have basically frenemies kind of situation, right? But also out of game. You also want to be able to know as a DM how to handle the out of game dynamics. Do you have players that don't get along? Do you have fights that happen between the players? Do you have a rules lawyer that people, argue with all the time? Or do you have too much sidebarring because they're too much of friends and they're too good together? These are all different types of table dynamics that, if you don't really know how to manage this, the game can fall apart. You can have much longer sessions, or you can just have campaigns that take, 5-6 extra sessions that they should have. And it can also deter some players who are expecting more of a, not rigid or strict, but they're expecting more of a formatted gameplay. They're expecting more of a controlled environment. And that might turn some people away. I'm not saying that, you have to be like on the book, hey, okay, you only get 30 seconds to talk kind of DM. But being able to know when it's time to cut someone off, when it's time to get people's attention, when it's time to move along, those are key aspects for in-game play and out-of-game interactions that I think any DM will definitely value and benefit from once you've kind of learned how. And this is just a people thing, right? It's how to deal with people. It's not easy, but it's one of the things that I think is one of the more valuable aspects of being a DM, because it's one of the many attributes of a DM that translates so much further, right? It's one thing. One of the things I love about D&D is just what it can teach you, and being a DM has definitely made me much better of a people person because of all of the various types of players that I've had, both gamed with, but gamed for, like I've actually run games for. And dealing with all of those different interpersonal situations definitely has given me a lot of unique insights on how to approach difficult situations, difficult emotions and things of that sort. So being able to run table dynamics in game and out of game, absolutely crucial for success and being a good DM. And the last one, rightfully so at the end here, the last pillar of a DM, I think, is the ability to take feedback, basically, or the ability to take criticism. And I think one of the best ways to learn how to do this, and one of the best ways to actually kind of tie this in with the communication to foster this open environment, is to have like after game or after campaign, like review sessions, like feedback sessions. Sit down with the players, ask them after after a couple games, after every game, however often you want to do it, but ask them how things went. How did the narration go? How did the rules go? How was the pacing? Did we go too long? Was there anything that we stopped? Just you could ask them questions, or just in general let them rate it and get that feedback. Be comfortable with that feedback, because then you can start to grow. And I think, when in my experience from DMs that I've talked to, a lot of DMs I feel are hesitant to either reach out or even just go research different styles of DMing, like go out there on their own and research how other people DM. I think either people get too comfortable or they get too prideful and they just want to do it their way, and that's fine. But when they do go out and see other people, it's like they cherry pick. They go, oh, I like what that DM said about that particular rule. I want to take that. I like that ruling. But they don't really look at the overall way that DM approaches narration or decision making, preparation. All they look at is that one thing, and they cherry pick it out. But looking at a holistic view of how other DMs run their games, run their campaigns, deal with players, that's given me much different insights on how I want to improve as a DM, right? Which is one of the reasons why I still play. It's one of the reasons why I still will jump into other people's games when I either have the time or the mental capacity to run another character. But it's still a reason why I like being a player, because it teaches me more about the things I either want or don't want in my DM style. And being open to that kind of criticism, whether it's just in a post-game feedback or in general, just asking your players every now and again what they think and what can improve. Kind of like one of the reasons why I have the suggestions in my Discord, just because I want people to let me know what they think I could do better, and then I have to judge whether that vibes with what I'm trying to do, or does that align with the trajectory that we're going with, right? And I think DMs just aren't really comfortable with that. I think most DMs just want to believe that right out the gate they can be a good storyteller, they can run a game and manage everything just fine. And I think it's just a pride thing, right? Most of us just don't want feedback, but this is one of those times where learning this type of feedback isn't about being right or wrong. This is one of those feedbacks of actually improvement, right? It's not about someone saying that they're better than you or that they could do it better than you. It's asking your players, hey, how could you have enjoyed this more so I can be better, right? Everyone wants to enjoy it more. And as a DM, I think that, being open to wanting to be better, I think is super important. So those were all of the pillars. Those were the foundational pillars, I think, make a good DM, or at least are a great starting point to being a successful good DM. Again, consistency, accepting player agency, or at least respecting player agency, open communication, being welcoming and inviting, being encouraging to the players, being flexible with the players, understanding the balance between challenge and fun, table dynamics and learning how to operate and control table dynamics, and learning how to accept and be okay with feedback and criticism from your game to become a better DM. Those are the foundations that I think make a fantastic DM. We'll close that one there. I need to take a quick break. I need to step away for just a second, and then we are going to start on the pillars, the foundational pillars, I think, for good players. And then we're going to move into the final discussion, which are those the safety nets that we talked about from the new follower Freeman that asked about that on the other stream. So I'm going to step away for just a sec. I got to figure out what's going on with my camera real quick, and then we will be back with the player foundations. Thank you so much for your patience. I will be right back. There we are. Press the right button. It's still doing it. I have no idea what the camera's doing or why it's like flickering like that, but we're going to continue anyway. Thank you for your patience. Let's continue with the foundational pillars of players. All right. So, 1 second here. What's going on? Okay, so let's see here. So, foundational aspects for players. So, first and foremost, I think this is kind of an important one, and I think it's one I think everyone assumes they understand this one, but I think it's understated or at least underdiscussed in the aspect that I think it's one of those assumed it's there. Like everyone makes the assumption, but no one really, I think, is on the same page with this one. And it's from the player's perspective, it's respecting the DM's authority. And this one I've noticed has, in my opinion, degraded more and more over the years. And I think it ties directly this is probably just completely correlation. And so I know correlation and causation are different, but my observation has been that the more accessible the information, the bigger the decline in the player respect for DM authority. And I think a lot of that comes down to before rules lawyers were the few and far between who actually took the time to read the books, have the books as players. But now you have people who spend time because they have access to everything. They spend time detailing out, builds, they min-max, they work, that we have such specific access to all of the information now that DMs are pretty much not the end all be all when it comes to the information. There's too much information out there for any one DM to hold in the first place, but they aren't expected to be the ones to answer. And it's no longer the expectation that if the DM doesn't know his ruling, if no one at the table knows, his ruling kind of trumps it or anything else like that. But now it's coming down to the fact that more and more players are willing to point out an error or point out how something's different and more or less go with their own knowledge and expectations. And let's face it, it is kind of a sense of entitlement. A lot of players, I feel, are entitled now. I've said this before on stream. It's kind of my hot take, but rightfully so. I'm not necessarily saying that is a bad thing, because I remember when I started and information wasn't nearly as available like with D&D Beyond, I was really beholden to any of my DMs. I had to basically go to my DM, and if I wanted to build my character, if I wanted to, create a new character, if I wanted to level up my character, I had to be there with my DM because he had the books. Regardless of which DM I was under at that time, way back in the day, that was all I had. I had to go to them in order to get the information. And if I didn't have direct access to that information, I had to go with whatever they told me. And whether or not it sounded right or not, it was, well, it's your ruling, so that's how we're going to rule it. And that's going to be the consistency, right? But now you have, I think, a lot more entitlement, but you also have a lot more empowerment from the players because they have access to the information. They've done the research. They know what they want to be able to do. So they're more likely to fight for it. That's the entitlement part, right? I mean, they're more empowered, they're more knowledgeable, but the idea is that they don't want to be wrong, just like the DM doesn't want to be wrong. Nobody wants to be wrong, but players especially want to get their way, their way more than the DM does. So having that respect for the DM authority is being able to let your voice be heard, being able to bring up, hey, I think the spell works like this based on the book. Do you mind if we check? Or, hey, I did read the spell. This is how it is in the book. I don't mind people bringing that up, right? But it's a difference of telling the DM, hey, you're wrong. This is how it is. that's that level of disrespecting the authority, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if the DM misquoted it. It doesn't matter if the DM didn't know it in the first place, or was just misunderstood it, or if the DM has intentionally changed it. It's on the DM now. Suggesting that it may be different and suggesting that they give it, giving them the opportunity to correct it is one thing, but outright making the decision that they are wrong is where I would draw the line in terms of the line of, player stepping over the line and, telling the DM that what they're doing is wrong. Now, it's a totally different story if this is a emotional situation and there's strife, right? If the DM's being a jerk about it, if there's a whole different situation, and there's a lot of exceptions we could talk about. But in general, I think that a good player should understand and respect that the DM does have a lot to handle. And now that players have more information, it can be beneficial because it does take some of that weight off the DM. But players also have to understand that the DM should be the final say in something. And so bringing things up should be done with a level of respect and understanding that there may be something more going on than you understand, and it may not just be straight out of the book like you say, like you think it is. But another aspect of this as well, another aspect of the respecting DM authority is something I like to call narration over nuance. And this is kind of a term that I've coined recently, thinking about these pillars and everything. And narration over nuance basically means understanding that the DM has a much more important job to keep the overall story, plot, narration basically. And again, the narration isn't just the story, right? We're not talking about like the storyline and everything. The plot is the idea of the goal. The story is the actual details of what's happening, and the narration is how all of that is being provided to you, right? That's why, if you haven't understood, or if you've been wondering why I use these things differently, that's how I've always looked at what those mean, right? So, understanding from a player's point of view that the DM has a lot more to keep cohesive. They have a lot more going on in terms of what they're trying to accomplish, what information they have to disseminate to you, how they have to get it to you, at what point they have to get it to you, and how it all evolves and wraps around everything else, right? And so understanding when it's time to make a push for something that you want or make an argument against the DM, this is where understanding the difference between narration over nuance. And this usually comes up when the DM has to take over in order to do a narration. I like to call them cutscenes, push the plot along. When something has to happen, and you typically see this when a player is not respecting the narration over nuance, when the DM will like narrate what's happening with the party and say what the party's doing to help address what they need done in the story, and then a player wants to argue, well, I wouldn't have done that. No, my character they'll say, well, it's like, oh, well, I wouldn't have tripped. Like, I didn't even get to roll a dex check. My character's dex is 19. I wouldn't have tripped. I shouldn't have, like those kind of things, right? Where that's that player entitlement, where they are worried so much about this one little nuance that they're going to interrupt the greater narration that the DM is trying to set up because they don't like one small detail. And that's what I mean by narration over nuance, is when you're a player and I say, and you want to respect the DM's authority, sometimes you have to give in to the fact that they may have an oversight. They may overlook something. Now, there are times where DMs will railroad you. There are times that DMs will flat out not respect your character and how you are, right? You could be the big tough thug and they could always try to, make NPCs, belittle you or something like that. Like, there are times when you can make that argument and have that communication with your DM. That's not what we're talking about here. This is just those times when you hear the DM say something in a general narrative, or is trying to push the story along, or is trying to take command of the party, and someone or multiple people in the party take issue with a detail or just the fact of, okay, so great, you guys did this, you guys rush into the next room, and then they go, no, well, we wouldn't have rushed in there, we wouldn't have done that, we would have like they basically try to back out everything, and it usually happens after they find out something bad happens. But a lot of the times they'll just interrupt the DM and be like, well, I don't like how that sounds, and how, you know what I mean? But from the DM's point of view, players just don't understand, like, he has to look at it from a much bigger, broad view. And yes, maybe that nuance isn't exactly how your character would have been, but you have to know when that nuance is actually important and when it can either be retconned after the fact, right? Like, it could be something, and then after it's all said and done, be like, hey, by the way, this was a little bit weird for my character. Could he have done this instead? Like, you can always retcon something to make the story, the thing that's written about what's happened so far up until this point, you can always retcon that. But the narration is what's happening, actively trying to pull the plot and the story together. And by ruining that narration, it can actually really just disrupt the gameplay. It can disrupt the flow of what the DM is trying to do. And it can just be very difficult for DMs do have to be flexible, but it can be difficult for a DM to keep that cohesion if you're constantly trying to disrupt the nuanced details that don't really matter. And I don't mean this in a bad way, but don't really matter to the DM, in the sense that I understand what you're saying. Your character may not have acted that way or may not have done that exact thing, but in the grand scheme of things, that doesn't matter, because the party needed to get from here to there. And I narrated you getting from here to there. That's what I needed. So there's a lot to that, but I do really think that players have a newer sense of entitlement. Again, not unduly because of the access of information, but I think that entitlement does make them forget that the DM has a lot more that they're trying to control. So sometimes they need to be given that leniency to do what they need to do to keep the narration going. So pillar number one for players, respect the DM's authority. You don't have to make that, you don't have to allow them to be a dick. You don't have to allow them to be rude and insulting, but you should just understand that what they have to accomplish is different than what you're trying to accomplish. And sometimes the small details aren't important to them as they are to you. And you have to learn to live with that. Pillar number 2, engagement. Now, I think this is kind of a given, but you'd be surprised if you haven't seen this yourself, how many players there are out there, new and old, that just are not very engaging, right? They need to basically be asked a question before they'll interact and before they'll talk. So this is one of those things where it's a foundation that I think every good player should learn how to get, is learn how to participate, learn how to ask questions to get the more information from the DM, how to be a good party member and work in game with the other characters, learn how to metagame a bit, right? Not like the bad metagaming where you're doing things that you shouldn't be able to, but talking with other players outside of the game and just discussing concepts, right? This especially works for new players when they're trying to learn things, is just talking with other people in and out of game can be so beneficial to just get more comfortable and to get more understanding of the game. So learning to be engaging, learning the balance of engagement, right? Learning not to, overtake when you need to, but just learning how to, play your character. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to make a voice. Doesn't have to mean you have to make a character that you get into, but just understanding how you want your character to come across and understanding how you would answer certain questions, how you would go about certain tasks, how you would accomplish certain goals, what actions you would take, how do you act in battle and encounters. These are all things that make a good character and make good engagement, right? If you're some players are just, okay, I go attack him. I just go attack him with my sword. That's not as engaging as, you don't have to sit there and make up an anime, description of what happens. But even the difference of I hit him with my sword, or it's like I make an attack with my sword, I hit him with my sword, I slash at him with my sword, I swing at him with my sword. All of these are various levels of engagement, right? But most of those are better than I do a basic attack, right? Swinging, slashing, using my sword. I attack with my sword. These are just slightly more engaging, and it does help other players, right? Some players are really get into it, and really describe in a lot of detail, but not everyone has to. But understanding that the engagement is changing it from that top level view of I did an attack to being more of that same level of description of, well, I'm attacking with my dagger, and I'm trying to cut him, so it's like, okay, so I cut him with my dagger, right? Like, just little tiny ways that really help bring you into the game, but also allows everyone else to stay in that mindset of the game, right? It doesn't break I'm missing the word right now, but it doesn't break that illusion, right? And everyone still gets to stay involved in the game. There is another word I'm thinking of, but immersion, that's the word. So being able to be even just slightly more engaging and listening to other players and seeing how their level of engagement's happening, even just helping that allows other people's immersion to remain, and that will just make a better gaming group altogether. And it'll help the DM too. It'll help the DM show that you are engaged with the game, that you are wanting to be there, because a lot of the times, even if you are enjoying it, but you're not engaged and you're not using, not necessarily using the right language, but if you're not representing your engagement, it can also affect the DM, because they may not see that you're having fun, and that may affect their gameplay. It may affect what they do next, or it may affect how they approach you next time, and how they're working with you, because if they're doing something that you don't look like you're enjoying, or the way that you're interacting with them doesn't seem like you're enjoying it, they may stop doing it, which may ruin your enjoyment, right? So working on engagement always definitely helps, kind of part of that communication, right? It's understanding how you operate within the party. Next one goes hand in hand with this, actually. This next pillar is basically ties right into engagement, which is collaboration. Being able to collaborate, and this works, again, both in and out of game. Learning how to collaborate in game, use your character to work with the party and work with NPCs, and how to use your skill sets and what you know and how your character operates in order to accomplish goals and get that story, that story and that plot pushed along. But also out of game, right? How to work with the other players, how to handle disputes, how to have successful but not interruptive sidebar, and how to encourage and help other players, but also get help and talk to other players and ask them questions, right? Any kind of collaborative effort is so important to any party. There are plenty of times I've run into groups that I've gamed for, or been part of, but mostly I've run into this when I've gamed the party, where the people just don't interact with each other. Like, the players come in, they have a good party, they have a good backstory, they have a good understanding in game, but when it comes to playing their characters and just them playing in general, they basically all just play like they're playing a solo game with NPCs. Like, they all only interact with each other if they have to. They don't really plan anything out. They just kind of assume that, well, I'm going to do this, and then I just assume that they're going to follow suit. And it just never feels as cohesive. It never feels as well worked out. I don't know what kind of word I'm looking for here, but I don't know. It just seems like everything's just kind of hobbled together and limping along, instead of when everyone's actually trying to accomplish the same goal and works together and talks, and you have so much more interesting situations happen because people have, thought it through and worked together and collaborated. So definitely working with the other players as well as working with the DM is so vital. Not just being engaging, but actually trying to make everybody better, whether it's in game or out of game. Make them better players, make them better DMs. Kind of ties back into the the foundation of being open communicative, or having open communication with the players, right? Being a player that's willing to openly communicate with each other is also super huge. Next pillar that we're going to be talking about, this one also could have gone in the DM's one, but I think it's I think this one's more of a given for a DM. I think but maybe I'm wrong there. Maybe this also should have been its own a pillar for both of them. But this, I think, is just a general pillar for life as well. So maybe this is just a moot point. But respect. This one isn't. We talked about respect for the DM's authority, but this one is respect in general for the fact that you are going to be most likely entering a game with a lot of different type of people, not just a DM, but all the players are going to be various types of people, various types of backgrounds, and they're going to have various different type of approaches to this game. They're going to have unique character builds. They're going to have unique ways of playing characters. Some are going to be really, really into roleplay. Some are not. And some are going to be min-maxers. Some are going to be new timers. And the thing about it is you just being respectful that everybody has a different path to this game, right? It's the same thing about being at level 10 in game and meeting a level 5. You have to respect the grind. You were a level 5 at one point. So if you're, a veteran gamer at a table and there's a new player, don't look down on that. Don't act like it's a problem. Like if you're that kind of player who hears that there's a brand new guy at the table and you're the one that sighs or rolls your eyes or basically says, well, there's the game night, you're the negative player. You're the toxic player, because that's basically saying like, well, I don't want to deal with anybody and I don't want to help anybody. I only want to play with people who are like me. I don't want to, and it's like, fine, if you're like that, fine, go play with those, advanced people, but you had to learn at one point. And if you think about it, there's someone more advanced than you. And if they looked at you like that, how are you going to learn to be like them? Right? If you think that you're you can act like that, then you must think that you're the best player, because who would teach you if they were better than you, if they have that same mindset? So how are you supposed to get better, right? Not everybody can teach themselves. Not everybody can just read the books and become a better player. Sometimes people do need that, interaction. They need collaboration. They need others' insights. So, respecting that there are going to be players at the bottom level, respecting that there are going to be, min-maxers. The fact that I don't like min-maxers, right? I'm not a huge fan. I like playing characters for the character's sake. I like playing the character's personality. I like evolving the character as the story plays out. I'm not huge, and I'm not a big fan of building a character from level 20 backwards, right? But some people do that, and I play with them, as players, and as a DM, I don't mind them. I will game with them. It's just not my preferred method of going about it, but I'm not going to sit there and trash talk them when things don't work out, or make fun of them when, their build doesn't work out. It's just one of those things where it's like, okay, that's the way you're going to do it. I'm not really into it, but hey, let's make it work, right? You're going to do your thing. I'm going to do my thing, but let's make it work. We're part of the same team here. And that's one of those things that it is very hard to instill in people. But when it comes to D&D, we are a great community. A lot of us are usually very, very open. So just having a little bit more respect for the fact that everybody has their own path into D&D. Some people came from Baldur's Gate. Some people have come from, old school D&D. Some people have, never even heard of D&D before. And it doesn't really matter. We need to be open to the fact that we want players, right? We all want people to enjoy D&D. So just, keep that in mind. If there's something that you're not liking, it's one thing that you don't have to like it, but you also don't have to make it known every 5 seconds that you don't like it, right? Like, there's ways to go about just tolerating things. All right. So next pillar, this one I think I don't know if this one's really a filler or a pillar, but I wanted to add this in here because it's really important, right? And it's one of the things that goes along the lines of, I guess, not really respecting the DM authority, but I don't know. So this one, I wrote this one in here for following and knowing the rules. And this one it's kind of weird to call this one a pillar because it's not really something that you can embody, but I feel like it's really important when it comes to players, because players usually for the most part, will have more experience in different settings and different additions than the DMs will. A lot of DMs will find an addition they like, they'll find a setting, a module, a campaign, whatever they're running, they'll find it, they'll like it, they'll perfect it. And unless they're going out and playing with other people, most of their time is going to be spent. Like for me, I have gone out and I still do occasionally go out and game with people, but primarily I'm locked in High Point all the time. I just game in High Point because that's my setting. That's what I do. And if I'm going to go into someone else's setting, I have to respect the fact that I don't readily know exactly what rules I'm going to have to follow for them, right? I don't know 5th edition rules off the top of my head as well as I know many 2nd edition rules. So when I go game in a 5th edition setting, I usually try to brush up or at least have certain rules ready on hand or talk to the DM about certain things that I'm not as familiar with, because I recognize that my experience is going to be skewed. Now, I'm a unique case because most people don't play 2nd edition anymore, so that's not really a problem. But even if you play 5th edition, there are different variations of 5th edition. There are different modules and different side settings that have adjusted the rules a lot more in the recent years. So with that, if you're coming into a setting and you have expectations of how Magic works, you may want to have that conversation with the DM of, hey, are you running a certain module? Are we running any variations on how things work? Because if you don't understand and if you're not willing to recognize that the rules may be different, then you may end up being disruptive because you and the DM are going to be on different pages for how certain things work, and you may be mad about the outcome, right? A spell may not go off like the way you think it is, or a certain roll may not be what you think it should be, or you may get a roll for something you think you shouldn't get a roll for, vice versa, right? So there's those kind of things I've run into. It's not as game disruptive. Usually those things are just kind of like they're mild and they just pop in, but it is one of those aspects that will make you a better player if you recognize that if you have a lot of experience in a certain type of one setting, or if you have experience in a lot of different settings, it's always good to kind of touch base with the DM and make sure that you're both on the same page with what rule sets you're using and what the expectations of how those rules work. And we are down to the last 2 pillars for the players now. So these last 2. So the next one is managing your time properly. This is a fantastic pillar, basically time management. And this one is all about how to manage the spotlight when it's given to you. A lot of players will not really know what to do with the spotlight. Some players won't really use it at all. And some players will abuse the crap out of it and, take monologues or just take over when they have a chance to. And other players, not even when they're given a chance to. Other players will just jump in and be like, oh, I have this cool idea, and just start going and just kind of, because they have this in their head that it's so great, they kind of just jump into this narrative and they give it, and by the time they're done, because they were so into it, they kind of have the entitlement, they kind of expect it to just be accepted. And this is very disruptive because it not only disrupts like the flow of the game pace. I will say this, most players are not good enough to, and I don't mean this good enough as in you're not good enough to like DM or anything, but most players don't have the ability to take over the narration of their DM and give a long-winded player narration that is in the same vein as the DMs, right? Most players don't know how to, embellish like their DM. And the narration gets off, right? Certain ways that they would have described things may be off. Mechanics, like, how you think something could have been accomplished can be off. Or just in general, the rule sets, right? You describe something thinking that you can get away with it, but don't realize that there's a role that's needed. So learning how to take the spotlight when it's given to you, use it appropriately, and then give it back in a good amount of time is something that can be very fundamental, because I think a lot of players want that spotlight and can shine in it very, very well, but it's very easy for them to either go way off track and kind of just, go off the rails with it, or just take it and run away with it. And then it's up to the DM to try to like rein them back in and get them, either back on track or just put a stop to it so they can take back over, right? But time management in spotlighting, and as well as not just spotlighting in terms of being able to do something cool, but spotlighting in the sense that when you're given control of the situation, hey, you're in town, what do you want to do? Hey, you just rolled a crit, how do you kill him? Hey, this NPC asks you this question, how do you answer? These are all spotlight moments, right? These are basically him handing the mic to you, saying you're now in control of the narration, what is going on? And there's so many different ways that you can approach this, but learning how to take those, add what you can, add what's needed, and then let the DM run back with that. So give the DM what they need, but be able to, help them out, right? And not do it in a way that's taking away from what they're trying to accomplish. It's a good foundational trait to have. It's a good skill set to have. And really, it's a lot of trial and error, and it's a lot of paying attention, right? Feeling it, knowing what the flow of the gameplay is, knowing how the narration works, and just making sure that you're taking cues from your DM if he's giving them, right? So that was time management. And the one for players, this one again may or may not be able to really be a pillar, but this one is very similar to the DM pillar, and it's basically being able to take and give feedback. Again, it all comes down to that open communication, but I think for the most part, most players don't ever get feedback as players. I would put money on the fact, I would put money on, the fact that DMs probably get 10 times the amount of feedback than players do. And I think it's because, for the most part, DMs don't want to give out, they're probably more afraid to give out player advice. And I think that players are more likely to speak up, mainly because there's more of them. Usually it's 4-1, but they're just more likely. Players are more likely to speak up when they have that entitlement and when they want something from that DM, but they're not really there to give good feedback. They're kind of there to just, say what they do and don't like. So being able to give good, proper feedback and have that open communication, talk about, improvements, but also being able to take it, right? Being able to talk to other players, being able to have other players come to you and give you advice on things, being open to that. That's something I think that we've lost in most gaming sessions. I don't know how, outside of session zeros, I don't know how many game parties actually sit down and really check in with each other on how everything's going, right? Like, unless they're a friends group, I think people show up, play the game, have fun, and they leave, but they don't really check in with each other as in as a group and say, hey, how is everyone going? How are all our characters working together? How are we liking our interactions with each other? Like, should we be doing more role play? How is the role play level? How is the metagaming? All of these are just different ways that you can look at it. But I don't think enough parties do that. I think, again, we make a lot of assumptions. We just go, hey, that was a fun gaming session. We're all having a great time, right? But maybe there's a player secretly just wanting to do more metagaming. They want to talk more conceptually about what's going on, right? Maybe there's more players that want to learn more about what all of the other players' skills are, but you all level up solo, right? You all level up on your own, so no one really knows until they see it in battle what each other's features are. And maybe they want to fix that. Maybe they want to know, as people are leveling up, what they can do so they can do more stuff in battle together, right? So being able to give and take feedback is just something that I think everybody should do in D&D. But I think this is also just for me, this is just a plea for people to just openly try to get those feedback sessions, right? After a campaign, after even just individual sessions, go for a kind of a breakdown of, hey, how are we feeling? What's going on here, guys? What are we doing? Yeah, so that's it. Those are the foundational pillars for players. Respecting the DM authority, being engaging and participating, collaborate with the other players and the DM, respect everyone, respect other players, respect their levels, respect their choices, following the rules, knowing the rules. So just understanding that every gaming group is different, and you might want to just make sure that you check in and make sure that you understand what's expected of you. Time management, making sure that you are participating and inputting proper things, but not taking over too much, and being willing to give and take feedback, both from DMs and other players. These are all things that I think could be very valuable in making a player, much more viable and much more enjoyable to be around. And those are the all the pillars that I wanted to talk about for DMs and players. Now, that was the primary focus that I wanted to talk about, because, again, really just wanted to take all the things that Kage and I have talked about over the last several months and really just kind of bring a good solid list down to what I think we've kind of just been tiptoeing around, which is just, again, good fundamentals for good DMs and good players. But now we're going to get to the next part of our discussion, which is the viewer question that I got during my live stream yesterday when I was gaming. And they gave me a question that kind of sent me down a rabbit hole of researching. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about this, and that's what kind of brought up this whole topic about etiquette. So they were talking about, I think, a public gaming site called Start Playing, which is a place where you can sign up as a player or a GM and pay to basically game, and you can have professional gamer DMs narrate your games and everything. Seems pretty cool website. And they also had mentioned that the question that really came to me, though, and I only bring up the public website because it kind of was tied into what I believed was the source of the things like this. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. But the question from Freeman was, what do you think of safety tools like X-Card or lines and veils? And so it was one of those things where it caught me off guard. I'm like, I don't recall knowing what those are. It didn't hit me. I was like, I'm not familiar with those terms. So I wanted to research those a little bit, and that's where I kind of came up with the etiquette, right? Because Kage and I have talked about etiquette, and you notice that in my list, a lot of assumptions were made, right? That's why I wanted to go through the list first, those foundational lists, because that really shows, I think, a little bit of the assumption that people are going to not be creepy, people are going to be respectful, and people are going to, understand basic social norms. But after reading up a little bit more on these safety tools, I'm starting to understand a little bit more about where they're coming from, why they're there. I'm not surprised at all that they're there. In fact, I'm very happy about them. But it did kind of cue in on the fact that there are a lot of assumptions, because I have had some really weird gaming groups. But in my mind, it's always just hey, if I don't like it, I'm just going to bounce. But when you have public spaces, when you have situations where you're going to go into a card room or you're going to go onto these paid websites, there should be some checks and balances. There should be some ways for people to have protections to make sure that they're not going to waste their time or money, especially when you're going to go somewhere publicly. And, that's a whole different level of anxiety to be public. And you don't want to be embarrassed in public, and you don't want to have any, odd situations. But then also with something like this, with Start Playing and you're paying money for it, you definitely want to have some checks and balances. So, what do I think of safety tools like X-Card, lines, and veils? Just to get the question out of the way, I think they're fantastic. I didn't know very much about them until just recently, but I think they're fantastic. I think they're very necessary in the context of online games. I think they are very necessary in the context of public gaming. But at the same time, it was kind of interesting because it was one of those things where I've never really needed these as a player or DM, mainly because as a player, I don't get offended very easily. It's just, as a person, I'm not very offendable. But as a DM, I don't really run into this because for the most part, I try to get to know my players as best I can. But I just try not to broach too many really dicey topics. I don't really stretch into the taboo topics very often, unless I'm with a very known gaming group, like unless I'm with like friends or something, and I know where my boundaries are. Because and that's just really what I do. I guess if I don't know what the boundaries are as a DM, I pretty much stay pretty chill with it. I only once I learn boundaries, I start to like expand what the narration has. But I do know that there's a lot of people who don't have that. They don't have the same limitations. They don't have the same understanding of what other people's limitations are. So, so yeah, looking into this, basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of talk about what each of these things are, the definitions that I was given and found, and then just try to talk about some talking points about why I think they're good and where I think these are kind of coming from, right? Because I do think that a lot of these are oriented around the public gaming space, and this is probably where they came out from. So we'll start here with lines and veils. So yes, something that I didn't really, again, something that I just kind of recently had to read up on because I wasn't really sure what they are. So lines and veils, very interesting. So lines and veils set the boundaries of the games. Lines are hard limits for content the group doesn't want to participate in. This means that the content will not be in the game, referenced in game, or alluded to. Veils are more like soft limits, meaning that when the content arises, it might be just mentioned in passing but not fully described, or it could mean that when the content shows up, it kind of results into a fade to black type of situation. So lines and veils, I think, are definitely in public gaming, I think are fantastic. I think that the concept that these were made, this basically hard and soft limits, I think make perfect sense. Everyone has their lines of what they don't want, right? I mean, there's D&D fictional in almost any universe you can think of. Absolutely, there's plenty of taboo topics. There's plenty of things that people just are not comfortable with hearing, listening to, whether it's cultural, religious, or just personal, right? There's some things people just don't want to listen to or hear, and that's very divisive, right? Like those are very divisive topics. So I absolutely understand why people would want to have some hard lines, right? Now, these are things where I kind of did mention this before in the list that we were talking about on the DM side about communication, understanding the rules and everything else like that. That's the same thing for players, setting your own limitations and your own boundaries. I think that's 100% should be available. So the way that I normally do this, because again, I don't really touch on too awkward of topics or anything else like that unless I know the people that I'm gaming with and I know what their comfort levels are. But the way I go about doing this is really just keeping my stories well within what the party is doing. Because I've talked about this at High Point a lot, where the way that the story really unfolds is what the players want, right? They create the characters, which based on what they create sets them in a certain place and time in High Point, and they go from there, right? So if they know that someone's, like let's say I have someone who has arachnophobia, right? Just doesn't want to deal with anything with spiders. And I know that, right? Let's say they told me that straight out the gate, like, hey, I have a hard limit on that. Like, I just don't want to deal with it. I just can't stand imagining them, right? So I'll know, okay, that ward's off limits, kind of things like that. So I would do something where it's like, if there's a situation where I know that I've built a cave full of spiders, I wouldn't just be like, oh my God, yeah, there's a cave of spiders there. I would I would try to basically warn them that that is not a path that the characters want to take. I'd give them every reason to, basically I'd do as much as I could to not directly allude to it, but get as close as I needed to get them to realize this is not what you want. Without trying to break the fourth wall or anything, right? But there's also an aspect of if the players are just going through with it, I'm kind of letting them lead. So if they get there, they have all of the warning signs, and then they get into the fight, and then all of a sudden they have a problem with it. It's like, at that point as a DM, I'm like, well, why did you do that? Like, I didn't tell you have to go here. That's not the way I game, right? If I know someone who has a problem with spiders, and I wrote a plot and a campaign that says you are going to go into this house, the door is going to lock behind you, and you guys will be trapped in a room full of spiders, and that is just part of the game that you are going to go do, that's different, right? For me, I don't run games like that, so It's not really something I've ever run into. I've never really broached a topic that I've had a player just have an issue with, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's acceptable, right? So yeah, I think that part of that, onboarding process, talking to players, I think this is one of those things. DMs could definitely be open to asking about this. Do you have any hard and soft limits? I typically don't ask that question right out there because again, it's just more of as I feel out the player, get to know what they're creating. I mean, I get a lot of that in character creation as well of what type of gameplay they're expecting. So yeah, I have my own like roundabout ways of figuring out what hard and soft lines are, but at the end of the day, this is a great question for DMs to ask their players. And it's also great for players to be open and honest about this, being willing to say, hey, these are things that I'm okay with and not okay with, right? Like there's probably tons of players who just, in general, whether or not whether or not the actual general concept you care about, but when it comes to D&D, I know that there's a lot of people out there who just are not comfortable with the sexual aspect of D&D in any way, right? In terms of like the role play, because, it's either in a public setting or they're online on microphone. Like in general, they may not have a problem with, sex and sexual oriented aspects in other content, but some people just don't want to be a part of that. They don't want to listen to two people, discuss that. They may not want to publicly discuss that. So that could be one thing. Some people just really might not be all about gore. So fights may not have to be as, descriptive. Like there's a lot of different, approaches, I guess you could say, to what, what those lines are, but being open of hearing them out as a DM and being open as a player to let them know. I think it's fantastic to have these. I think that these are good safety tools. But if I were really to, to make a judgment on this, I would say that while I think that this is a fantastic tool for DMs to have, I think it would be great to have a DM in their repertoire of asking their players as they onboard players individually, hey, do you have any harder or soft lines? Do you have anything that, you don't want to touch upon? While I 100% think that is fantastic, and I encourage DMs to do that, I will say, whether you take this as a hot take or not, I will say that, in my opinion, this falls more on the player than it does on the DM. And the reason why I say that is because while a DM should be respectful of it and should be open to hearing about hard and soft lines, I wouldn't go so far as to say it is the DM's responsibility to ask and accommodate. Now, it is the responsibility to accommodate if they want that player, right? Like, if the player and the DM want to game together, they both have a responsibility to accommodate. But I don't think that the initiation of this falls on the DM. I don't think it's the DM's responsibility because the DM has a world. The DM has a campaign. They have a module. They have something that they're following. That's what they want to do. They are the narrator. They're the storyteller. They're the plot driver. And that is their role in this game. They are a player just as you are, where you have a playing character going through the story. Your role is to play that character. Their role is to play all the other stuff, right? So for them to be respectful enough to change that for you and to modify how they're going to game for those soft and hard limitations, 100% believe that makes a excellent DM, and every DM I think should do that. But they're going to be the DMs who are like, no, I'm not going to make any changes, right? And you as a player have to deal with that. You have to just accept it or leave. But DMs, I think it would make a perfect DM to do that. Although I'm not going to put the onus on the DM because, like I said before, D&D is a fantasy game. It exists in so many different universes and so many different variations. And again, DMs have spent time crafting how they're going to do these things, that to expect a DM to be always ready and expecting to constantly change their narration because someone may not like it, because one person may not like it, is a lot to put on a DM when if a player knows I have a problem hearing this and I can't play this game if I hear this or talk about this, they need to make that known, because if they don't, it's, there are so many variations, right? A player can have so many different types of DMs and so many different types of, worlds to play in. that if they have something that's going to stop them from playing, they need to be vocal about it. They need to let everybody else know. Now, they shouldn't sit there and demand, hey, all of you can't do this, but they can let people know, hey, this is something I have a problem with and I won't be able to stick around. It's a respect thing, right? Demanding people don't do it is one thing, but saying that you won't be able to be around without it and giving them that choice, that's a completely different thing. And that's where I think this comes down to is I love it. I think lines and veils are great. I think they should absolutely be used. However, again, if I'm really thinking about it, I don't think the onus should be on the DM. I think it makes a great DM, one who asks this and takes it into account. I think that's what makes a great DM. I think a good DM takes it into account when it's brought up. But I really think it falls on the player to be the one to broach this and say, hey, I have hard lines. That's just what I think, but yeah, I think it's really cool. I've never heard of lines and veils in that context before, so that was really interesting. Another term, I think this is just generic term that we've all heard is open door. Open door is, is an assurance that anyone in the group can take a break from the game for their own safety and well-being without judgment. This should be made clear to the group. This is. This is one of those ones. This one might be the only one that I was kind of surprised at, because I do know that there's the trope of, it sucks when a gamer can't make it for scheduling purposes because then the gaming group can't game, right? Like it does suck when, the game doesn't happen because one player. I know that there's that trope, but this was one of those things where I just never really thought that this was like, I never really just in all my years of gaming, I just didn't think this needed a name, because I just always assumed that, yeah, if you were just done, you were done. Like, it's one thing to have that trope of someone doesn't show up, no one can game. And that's the trope of, because everyone, including the person that didn't show up, wanted to show up and game. Whereas if you have someone who doesn't want to show up and not game, it's never really occurred to me that we needed a term or a concept to decide this is the term we need to say this can happen. Like, it was one of those things that if you're done gaming, you're done gaming, and at any point you're not obligated to game. But I guess making sure that people understand that, hey, you left and we're going to hold it against you by not inviting you back, or we're going to treat you badly next time because, but like, I totally understand that there are people who would be that way. And having a structured concept within the community of, hey, everybody should be able to come and join as they please. Now, I can understand if the DM does have a hard time with that, if the DM is open and communicative, saying, hey, I'm cool that if you guys need to take a break, I understand, but please keep in mind that I can't do it back. I can't just keep doing that forever, and I need you guys to, at least show up regularly. You know what I mean? Like, the DM can basically say, hey, if you guys like break regularly, I'm probably not going to be able to keep you as a player. That's cool. Everybody can have that conversation. But yeah, I 100% agree. Like, the assuring that anybody can take a break from the game for any reason and not have anything happen to them, no judgment, no retaliation. I find it ridiculous that we have to have that, but then again, we have some ridiculous laws that should be common sense, right? So yeah, this one I have no issue with. This one's 100% available in High Point. Absolutely, I believe that, anybody has just, for me, it's just the obvious to me that yes, you could always have the right. But I should preface this with, I'm also a little bit biased, because I should say that I also have this written into High Point, though. I've mentioned this multiple times on other streams with Kage, that with High Point, the way that I do it is the party is never really locked. Like, it's been very, very rare that, in fact, it's actually only happened to one of my players for one of their characters that they were locked due to another party member. It's the only time. In fact, I think it actually only happened really once, maybe twice. But yeah, only one of my players has actually had it, just due to that particular campaign and how the two characters were intertwined. But for the most part, I've never had a gaming session that I couldn't run because of a player who didn't show up. But that's because I have things put in place in order to deal with that, right? Either I will, either I get pre-permission from my players, say, hey, if you don't show up, can I game your character? I'll get permission, and then the game will go on as normal, and I'll do my best to game the character as necessary and retcon anything after, we discuss whether or not I did everything correctly. But the other option too is that because I look at gaming from the point of view of each individual player, that's working together in a party, but not as a party as a whole. I look at the party as a collective, not as an entity. And because of that, I'm really running a game. Like when I have a party of 4 people, in my mind, I'm running 4 games. I'm not running one game with one party. I'm running 4 games simultaneously. They all just happen to be at the same place at the same time, listening to the same details. But I'm not listening to that, right? I may be saying the monologue, the spiel, the description once, but in my mind, I'm going, okay, you know that, you know that, you know that, you know that, because in the next sentence, I might be like, but you see this. And now in my head, I'm like, okay, so you see A, you see A, you see A, B, and you see A. And then I might say, you see this. So it's like, okay, so you're A, you're AC, you're AB, you're A. And that's just what I'm constantly doing, because for me, each and every one of those players is having a different experience. They're having a different game, and they have different agendas. That's how I play High Point. I encourage my players to have agendas for their characters. So yes, you are part of a party. You are working towards the party's objective, but you also have your own. You also have your own desires and wants and drives. And I try to instill that in all of my players. So when someone doesn't show up, especially if it's not like mid-fight, or something like that, if someone doesn't show up and they're all like in a town, it's easy. That person's on the other side of town right now. So we're going to game while they're outside of town, right? Like, we're just not going to leave. We just won't leave you behind, right? We wouldn't like advance the entire campaign without you, but I can run that gaming session without your character there. I can say that your character had a meeting and you're going to be gone for the next 3 days. I can say that your character traveled forward ahead of time, right? There's so many different ways that I can take out a character. Even if it's somebody who comes over, I've had times where the whole gaming group couldn't make it, but one person could. So we did a sidebar. I think they were even in the middle of like, they were camping or something. So we did like a dream session on one time. Other times I've done solo combat where they were, overnight camping. And so we just said, well, hey, you guys were all like doing a watch, right? So we'll do an encounter on your watch. And then while they were, let everyone else sleep. So they had a whole encounter. They could talk to somebody. Maybe they had a fight. But they had a whole situation that happened that none of the other players know about. And it's now up to that player to tell the players and the characters in and out of the game what happened. And sometimes sometimes they've been like, guys, you won't believe what happened. Like, the next gaming session, they'll be like, man, last night, you won't believe what happened. And then other times they'll just be like, I'm going to hold on to that. I'm going to keep that information for me. So open door policy. I kind of have it pre-written into High Point that players can come and go as they please. I have ways around it, so I'm not that worried about it. But yes, I agree with it. I think that's fantastic. I don't see any problems with that. I definitely think that it's probably more of a problem for DMs, but I think DMs are just going to have to get over it and just learn how to be adaptive, learn to be flexible. Figure out ways to not completely just let an entire gaming session go to waste because of one person, if you can. But yeah, so let's move on to the next one. So this one is really interesting. So these ones I want to say, I don't know if these are more modern or not. These ones I think are more unique though, because you have the hard and fast lines, the lines and veils before, but this one's more interesting. So these are cards. So there's the X, N, and O cards. And they're check-in tools. So I already kind of dig these, right? So X cards are used to indicate that a participant is uncomfortable with the current content, often resulting in a change, rewind, skip, or a skip of the aforementioned content. So this is kind of interesting, right? So you have your lines and veils, you have your pre-discussion, you have hey, I don't like sexual themed content. Let's not do sexual themed content in the game for me. Totally fine, right? That's a line. There won't be any sexual content, beyond like maybe public displays of affection, but outside of, the general like affection, there won't be any sexual content. But let's say that person also, just has also a religious background. And let's say they have a deep religious like thing against cannibalism, we'll say. So they didn't really tell you that. It's kind of something that doesn't really come up in conversation a lot. But let's say the campaign session happens to come across maybe you're dealing with werewolves or something, right? But you happen to come across a situation where you begin to describe, cannibalism, and that just immediately they're like, whoa, hey, I can't be in the room talking about this. I can't be any part. Like maybe they have some deep, affliction to where they can't be a part of anything that supports it. So they can't be in part of the game that's supporting cannibalism, right? Like I'm using an extreme example here, but it's the first thing that's coming to mind, right? So they have this card that basically lets them go, like, whether it's a physical card or they just raise their hand and be like, whoa, hard pass. Sorry, I didn't put this line out there before, but yeah, I can't, that's not good content, right? Whereas an end card is used by the participants if they feel content is heading towards the wrong direction. So instead of the X card basically saying, hey, look, you're coming across and you realize that, the situation's about to be like one werewolf's about to eat the other one's heart, right? So the X card could basically be like, I can't do cannibalism. So, or ritualistic sacrifices or whatever, religious reasons. So you rewind and be like, okay, well, you see, they rewind and they change it to where, one werewolf's being tied up and now he's being threatened that he's gonna, be like seen by the sun or something, right? And that'll hurt him. Like just changing the story to where it's not going to do what was expected. Whereas the difference being the situation of you walk up to the werewolves and one has a knife and he seems to be about to do the heart cutout thing to eat it. And someone does the end card. Like, I get what's going on here. I'm not opposed to the fact that it's happening, but I really don't want any more description. So you throw that end card down and then they're like, cool. So you see the one with the knife creep up to him and says, I'm sorry, dear friend. And he must do what needs to be done. And afterwards he comes to you, after he's cleaned himself up and in the silence of the graveyard, he discusses things. Like you could make all of those implications of, okay, you're not comfortable with what just happened. I'm not going to describe what happened. So we're just going to cut forward, do the maybe faded back or just we're going to cut forward to when it's all said and done. So y'all know what happened. We don't have to say it anymore. So that would be the end card. And then the O card is used to check in on the group and ensure that everyone is comfortable continuing with the content. So this would be more of a, so you guys creep up into, the graveyard, you see two werewolves, you see one bound and gagged and you see the other with a knife. O card. Everybody cool with what's about to be done? You guys just heard back in the library that a werewolf has to, eat the heart of its master to cure itself. You guys see what's happening, right? Everybody good? And X cards, anybody? Like, I kind of like that, right? So it's like the X card is, we've gone too far and I didn't catch it in time and I need this to be done and over with and never mentioned again. N cards are, hey, we're getting a little bit too close. Can we kind of skip ahead? And the O card is before we get there, do you see where we're headed kind of thing, right? So there's these different stages of check-ins. So I like it. Like, I like the approach. I like the idea. I like the concept, these cards, whether you flip them or just raise your hand or whatever. I like that we've put words to these, right? I like that we've established these three benchmarks of the DM having this way of saying, hey, we're going to get into some interesting content. If anybody has a problem with, ghosts or spirits or undead or blood, being able to basically say, here's what we're about to get into. Is anybody have a problem with this? I think that's great. I think that's a great thing for any DM to do. I think if you're conscientious enough as a DM to be able to ask that, I think that gives you bonus points. I would struggle with this because, again, it's hard for me. I know certain taboo points that, I shouldn't do, but there are some things that for me are very reminiscent of D&D and sci-fi and fantasy. And so there are some things like, again, like the example I just gave, the one that just came straight to my mind was like, the werewolf having to eat the heart of their sire in order to cure themselves. To me, that's a common trope. To me, that would not be out of place in D&D. And if I was in a gaming session and a DM described that in detail, wouldn't faze me, wouldn't be out of place. Sounds totally normal in D&D. In fact, I mean, I'm not hugely interested in describing gore in my games, but that would be something that I would not think twice about describing what's happening, right? I wouldn't think that would be out of place for me to describe. So I would probably need a player to throw an N or an X card down, or at least be like, hey, if you're going to explain all the details, can we skip that? I'm totally cool with that. I wouldn't mind it. It's a little, I will be honest, I would think it's a little bit of a bummer because it does ruin my headcanon a little bit. But again, players' comfort and fun is way more important than the story that I crafted. You know what I mean? So I don't know if you're here, the Freeman, but to answer your question, what do I think of safety tools? I think they're great. I think it's fantastic that we've put a name to things. I think that we finally have collaborated as a community enough to come down and put these out there and say, hey, here are some great benchmarks. Here are some great foundations for you to use. And here are some great things that we can all agree upon, right? We can all understand what the XNO cards are meant to represent. And that's, I think, is fantastic. I think that if we all have that type of understanding, if we all have that communication and that language, I think that works, right? Having the open door policy, I think, is just, again, I think pretty much any DM should just be willing to be flexible with that. But yeah, don't hold it against someone if they can't make it. And then, hard and soft lines, lines and veils, like hard and soft is just, it makes sense, right? I would not be surprised. I would never be surprised if a player had done that previously, but it is nice to bring it to the public's attention and encourage it, right? And that's what I want to do. I want to encourage it. I want to tell you guys, like, you should do that. If you have problems, bring it up with your DM. If you are a DM, maybe consider adding these kind of questions to the session 0, making sure that there are any areas that you've planned to broach upon. Whether you tell them, hey, here are the main plot points and here are some things that we're going to go over, or just ask them outright, hey, do you have any issues or hard stops that you just don't want to do? I think it's all great. I think that it's fantastic. We as a community have made these. I think it's great that we're building awareness for them. And I don't know if I will add these into my process directly like I've expressed them, because I think as of right now, my process has those in them, but it's more of I learn by interacting with my players and learn where their boundaries are without just having a flat out conversation. But I also try to constantly keep open communication. So if there are any issues, making sure they are able to bring them to me long before they become a problem, I think is something that I also foster. So, yeah, thank you so much, the Freeman, for bringing those to my attention. That was really interesting read, really interesting to get all of that. And I think that was a really fun topic to just kind of really cover a lot of what I think makes for good DMs and players. And adding these, aspects of safety tools would be, I think, a great addition to anybody's gaming group in any kind of campaign. So again, thank you so much. Thank you for the idea. Thank you for the topic. I think that was a lot of fun. But I do think that was pretty much everything that I wanted to cover. Was not too bad in 2 hours as well. Not bad. I was actually kind of worried that it would go a little bit over. I was thinking there would be a lot more content to cover, but no, we did that. That was fantastic. I really liked going over that topic. I like to see that the community is growing and becoming a lot more inclusive and having tools out there for people to do. So yeah, I'm 100% up for them. I want to encourage them. I think they should be out there more. So yeah, tell your DMs if you're joining gaming groups, tell your DMs about these safety tools. If you're a DM, try to see if you can incorporate them. I think that would be fantastic. That's going to be me for tonight though, guys. Thank you guys so much for joining me. If you're out there listening right now and you're enjoying this and you want to see any of our other content, all of our live streams are on our YouTube VOD channel. So let me drop that in the Discord right now. So, or not the Discord, let me drop that in chat right now. So that's our YouTube channel. You can see all of our live streams, all of our VODs are up there. If you want to check out any of our other topics, they're all, labeled just like this one is. So go check that out. And if you want to join our Discord, if you want to give me more topics and more ideas that I can, research and talk upon like I did today. You can join our Discord. I'll drop that in chat as well. And you can also give us ideas for homebrew reviews that you want. So every Monday, I do a homebrew review with my buddy Kage, where we'll take something that was submitted by a viewer and we'll break it down. We'll read through it. We'll give you guys ideas of what we think about it, how we might be able to use it. And yeah, just kind of give you, just a breakdown of what we think about it and just different ways that you might be able to play with it a little bit. So if you like that kind of stuff, join me on Monday. Otherwise, every Friday, I do this where I take a topic and I just break it down. Otherwise, on the weekends, I'll play games. If you kind of like that kind of stuff, you can catch me on the weekends as well, where it's more chill and I'm just, hanging out and talking with you guys. But otherwise, I hope you guys had a great week. I hope you have a great weekend ahead of you. That's going to be me for today. I will be back on Monday with D&D Discussions Homebrew Review. Have a great rest of your night, guys. Cheers.